talking about some tips and secrets for a healthy heart. And we have Marc Newell, who is a member of our congregation, and he and his family, with Carrie and 3 lovely kids, have been here for 8 years. And so glad that the drones have now met them. And Marc is a specialist, non-invasive cardiologist at the Minneapolis Heart Institute, so we're really lucky to have him here. He's a Gustie, that's okay, and has been with the Newell Medical School in Abbott Northwestern and internal medicine residency there, as well as the University of Minnesota Cardiovascular Disease Fellowship. So we know that we have somebody who knows his stuff. Marc enjoys patient care in the clinic and hospital, and he has expertise in coronary CT angiography, having done research in this area as well about heart attacks and acute coronary symptoms. His non-clinical interests are many, including developing new systems of care, cardiovascular telemedicine, which we know our friends in upstate Minnesota can use. And he's the chief of clinical cardiology for the Minneapolis Heart Institute, director of teleheart, I'll have to ask you about that, as well as a VP of operations at the Heart Institute. So welcome, Marc.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks everyone for coming. To them. All right, so good morning. We're going to have a little fun today, hopefully learn a few things, and talk mostly on 3 things. Focus a lot on diet, talk about screening, and then talk a little bit about what symptoms you shouldn't ignore, and leave some time for questions at the end, because I'm happy to answer any questions from any range of cardiology. So thanks for being here. So talk a little bit about obesity. We've heard that this is an epidemic. I'll kind of show you some slides that make it pretty obvious that it is. Talk about fat, and talk about some of the things we hear about diet that may or may not be true. There's a lot of information out there, so let's kind of get to what does actual science say behind some of the things we do with our diet. And we'll talk about screening for heart attacks, and talk about symptoms that we should not ignore. So this slide, I'll make 2 disclaimers. Number 1 is I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a dietitian. And so I will give you that advice based on the science that we have in cardiology. And then secondly, a lot of these slides are borrowed from my good friend who's our director of prevention at the Minneapolis Heart Institute, Dr. Mike Newell. So he actually trained at Harvard, did a lot of studying on diet. So a lot of this information is really good stuff. So when we talk about how we look at evidence in the scientific literature in cardiology, we talk about anecdotal evidence, which is stories. Okay. We talk about basic science, which is with lab rats or other things like that, not necessarily real human information. Observational studies are studies where we study big groups of populations to say, okay, what does it look like when 10,000 people do this? And then randomized controlled trials are what we consider the best evidence, which is when we actually isolate everything other than what we're studying. And this is one of my favorite slides. So this is anecdotal evidence, right? So everybody has that story about their neighbor's grandma who lived to 100 and she smoked her whole life, and how come she got away with it? Maybe smoking isn't bad for you. Well, this is a story. You'll hear stories both directions. You'll hear about the person that lived right, did everything right, and unfortunately had a heart attack and died at 50. Then you'll hear about a lady like this who lived to 100 and smoked, and it doesn't seem fair. So there's a couple points from this slide. One is that everything in medicine is probabilities. It really is. And so, for instance, something that I'm not involved with, something like colon cancer. Colon cancer actually happens to less than 0.5% of people in the whole United States. But it's very important. And so we need to understand, well, we obviously shouldn't screen 5-year-olds for colon cancer. But we should screen people that have a family history of colon cancer. We should screen people at certain ages for colon cancer. So part of what we always study is to try and be better at who's at risk, how should we study them, and what should we do once we know that information. And so part of understanding risk is understanding probabilities in medicine. So we certainly will see 100-year-olds that smoke their whole life that survive. And we'll certainly see 50-year-olds that have heart attacks that just, eat a healthy diet, they exercise. And so one thing I'm always fascinated by is that nobody ever feels guilty about having cancer. But I see a lot of people that feel very guilty about having poor disease or heart disease. Well, it's not necessarily your fault if you get heart disease. It happens to every other person by the time we've passed away. And so when we study things and we tell you to eat healthy and do this and do that, it's not to make you feel bad if you don't do it or if you have a problem down the road. It's actually more just trying to help lower people's risk for heart attacks or heart disease or events. So I'm going to focus on some of the diet talks on things that actually have been large groups of patients that have been studied, or things that have been randomized to try and figure out what's our best diet, what can we help you guys with practical things. Does anybody remember what this is? The fridge. Okay, what was so fascinating about the fridge back in 1985? Yes, he scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He was a defensive lineman. And the thing that was fascinating about him was he was gigantic. He was so much bigger than everybody else. He was not only broad, but he was overweight. How much did he weigh? Yeah, so he weighed about 320 pounds. Oh, give me the microphone here. So in 1985, it was news that we had somebody that was 320 pounds. Guess what the average weight of a lineman is right now in the NFL? Yeah, it's actually higher than that. And so what we used to think was, wow, this guy is huge, 30-some years ago. Now it's kind of average. And so that just kind of shows you what I'll show you in the next few slides. Not going to get hopefully too boring or too scientific on you today. But if we look at the obesity trends from 1990, so the darker the shade of blue, the more obese there were. So in Minnesota, less than 10% of people were obese in 1990. I'll flip through here by 5 years. You'll see the trend actually is pretty striking. Colors start changing, not in a good way. So by 2000, there's a lot of, over 20% of the population in a lot of these states is now obese when they weren't 10 years ago. Minnesota's done better, but we're still 15 to 20%. And then you go to 2005, and 1 out of 5 people in Minnesota, 1 out of 4, in a lot of the southern states are obese. And so clearly this is a disturbing trend over a short period of time. We're talking about 15 years. When we look at 2015, it's actually very scary. So Minnesota now is 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 people are obese. And a lot of places in the country, it's almost half. And so clearly something has changed, and something's changed in relatively short order to make our population much more obese and then therefore much higher risk for future heart disease. So what changed? Did we get that much less active in 20 years? We have more processed foods? Is it something we're eating? Is it alcohol, tobacco? Is it not sleeping well? Or is it just more food? It's probably some combination of all the above. But I think we'll point out and we'll find that it's actually mostly this last one. So clearly, we're eating more. If you look at that same trend of time, actually going back to the 60s to 2015, especially in countries that are industrialized, so countries that are more established, we already started eating more. We were eating almost 1,000 calories more than underdeveloped countries if you look back in the 60s. And as you can see, there's a huge gap in terms of how much more we're eating. So even back in the 60s, we're eating less than 3,000 calories, now we're up to 3,500 calories. So we're eating a huge percentage more food as we go forward. And then you look at just some examples of portion sizes. So this is the old popcorn in the movie theater. Now, this is the new popcorn in the movie theater with 3 refills, right? And so you see 270 calories now. If you look at your refill, you're eating 1,300 calories. Similarly with sodas, with bagels, with burgers, with anything, if you go out to eat and you finish your whole meal, you've probably had 2,000 calories. 2,000 calories is what we're supposed to eat in a whole day. And so portion control and size of what we eat is very important when we talk about weight. It's a picture from our own Skyway cafeteria at Abbott Northwestern where I work. These are the cookies you can buy. I should have put a reference that bigger than my hand. At least we got rid of the McDonald's at Abbott now, but we still have these. So we're not doing so well teaching portion control in our own backyard. So Dr. Newell, I mentioned my partner, who was the head of our prevention group, did a lot of really interesting research when he was out at Harvard, and worked with a couple guys that did some really fascinating studies that are simple but very informative, talking about portion sizes. So they actually just did a study where they replaced 12-inch plates with 10-inch plates and saw what happened to those people. If you just make the plate that much smaller, they don't feel any less full. They certainly eat a lot less food, and they're just as happy. They can eat kind of what they want, but they've actually cut their amount that they eat by 20%, 22%, if you just switch the size of the plate. So there's a lot of visual cues to what we eat, and a lot of, feeling like you're full has nothing to do with actually how much you eat. It's what you see in the fact that, oh, I cleaned my plate, I must be full. Interestingly, we'll talk more about fat, but when they started replacing fat in foods that we eat in the 1980s, they put the low-fat sticker on there, right? You've all seen it? Oh, this is low-fat. Well, guess what happens when you see that sticker? People eat 20% more of whatever they got because it's better for you. Well, this isn't as bad for me, I'll just have a little bit more. So when we put a low-fat label on things, people actually end up eating more of that food, which is probably worse, especially when I'll show you what we replaced it with. This is also interesting. Bulk purchases, if you go and get your 64-pack of granola bars, you're much more likely to eat more of those granola bars because they're there. And so actually when people buy things in bulk, they end up actually eating more than most of it's actually eaten within 6 days of when they buy it. So if you're buying that pack of 64 granola bars for the next 2 months, it'll probably be gone by next week. It's a little scary. This is my favorite study because it's so simple and so interesting. So soup. And I also like that they trick doctors. That's always kind of fun, right? And so this is a guy at Harvard. He set up what he called a lunch lecture for physicians. So he had 3 groups of physicians come through for a free lunch. They put bowls of soup in front of the physicians, and then they gave a lecture. So the doctors weren't really paying attention to their soup. They're kind of watching the lecture. They had to answer just a few simple questions before and after they had lunch. What they did, one side of the table had normal bowls of soup. You have 8.5 ounce bowls of soup. The other side of the table had bowls of soup that actually auto-filled from underneath. So as they would eat the soup, and they weren't paying attention, the bowl would fill up. Okay, so they would actually get a lot more soup. And the simple questions were, how much did you eat? How full are you? And did you enjoy your soup? The answers were exactly the same when they were done. The group that had the auto-filling bowls had twice as much soup. This much soup versus this much soup. And so they said they were just as full. They said they ate the same amount. They said no difference in how they felt or what they felt like they ate, but they actually ate twice as much. Fascinating, right? And so it's much more to do. So that's 8.5 ounces in the one group versus 15 ounces in the other. They didn't feel any different in how full they were. They didn't feel any different in how much they guessed that they ate. And so it really had nothing to do with how they felt. It had everything to do with what they were seeing. Well, I've got more soup. Let's eat more soup. And so I think that's very informative for portion control and sizing and feeling like you're full, is understanding what's an appropriate portion and just have that and it should be good. So your food environment has a significant impact on how much you eat, and how much you eat has a significant impact in your weight as we go forward. So let's talk about fat. Fat is an interesting topic and one that gets a lot of questions, I think appropriately so. So this was the old concept. If you take a lot of fat, fat's bad for your cholesterol, makes your bad cholesterol go up, and then you're going to have more heart attacks. Kind of makes sense, that's what we've always been taught. But let's take a look at what actually happens. And so, again, I'm trying not to get too sciencey on you, so I'll explain these graphs. But basically, as we go up this way, this is more heart attacks on top, less heart attacks on the bottom. And as we go this direction, we're talking about more fat. So the most fat intake is over here, the lowest is over here. So look at a person that lives in Finland versus a person that lives in France. They eat the exact same amount of fat, but the group in Finland has 7 times more heart attacks. So it's probably not the fat intake, it's probably something else. That's just one example. This is actually a really interesting study. Hello? Okay. Really interesting study here. Actually almost 80,000 people from something called the Women's Heart Study. And this black line in the middle is what we call relative risk. So this is our reference point. So 1.0 is a reference point. If you go below the line, that means it's better. If you go above the line, that means it's worse. So they're actually looking at fat intake, and as people took in more and more fat, this is the percent of their diet that was fat, as they took in more and more fat, they actually had less heart attacks. They had less heart attacks. So maybe it's not the fat, maybe fat's not bad for us. This is not what we've ever been told, right? Is this news for some people? And so we've got, again, very large groups of studies that show that actually maybe fat's not the problem. One other thing that gets a really bad rap is red meat. It's very healthy to eat fish, I'll just say that up front. So eating your salmon and your fish is absolutely the way to go. We'll talk about the Mediterranean diet in a moment. But if you're actually somebody that loves a burger, so everyone look at you. Yeah. If you love burgers, if you love steaks, if you have unprocessed red meat that you grill and cook yourself, this relative risk of heart attack is 1.0, so it's no higher risk if you're actually preparing yourself. What happens when you go out to dinner, go out somewhere? What do they put on your red meat? Butter, salt, who knows what else. And when you have processed meats, the risk is much higher. It's 40% higher for heart events. So that's part of how we get red meat is it's bad for you. But if you love a burger, if you love a steak, go ahead and grill it yourself, prepare it simply, maybe put some olive oil, whatever you like on it that's healthy, and go ahead and have your red meat. Saturated fats. So I'm going to talk specifically about fats. I'm going to look a little bit deeper into this. Actually, saturated fats also got a fairly bad rap. This is another study looking at risk for having saturated fat intake. There's no difference than not having it. And so it wasn't the saturated fats. But this was the thing that got attacked and removed when you see those low-fat labels. Let's take out the saturated fat, so we'll slap a low-fat label on it and we go buy it because they know it's healthier for them. But what they did was in certain foods, they replaced that type of fat with what's called polyunsaturated fatty acids. And when they did that, actually the heart disease risk went down. So going left on this graph is better. A lot of times what they replaced the saturated fat with was what? Carbs, sugar. So they, hey, this is low fat, let's put a low fat label on it, we'll just stick some sugar in there, it'll taste better. And then people will be eating low fat, they'll be heart healthier, it should be great. Well, you see that sugar is probably the real enemy, because heart attack rates went up almost 10% when we started pulling fat out and putting sugar into some of these foods. Especially when you're eating 20% more of it because of the low fat label. Okay, so they looked at this a different way in terms of glycemic index, meaning how much sugar. So the lower the sugar that was replacing the fatty acids, the better it was for your heart. If it was kind of a medium range, there was no difference. And when they put things that were very high in sugars, like sugar itself, you see really, really high rates of increase in heart disease. So again, fat's probably not the enemy, sugar probably is. And so we need to be really careful when we look at labels and look at risk. This is in a group of patients with over 50,000. Work? Everybody good? Okay. So, here's the dietary fats, maybe not the enemy. In fact, if we take the right kind of fats, then we actually be healthy. Everybody hear me okay in the back? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so the other one I had a little further away, I'll hold this one closer. And so what do we know about the evidence for heart healthy? I've told you that maybe fat's not the worst, we should maybe watch our sugars. And we should control our portions. What's actually heart healthy for us to eat? So there have been a couple studies that have looked specifically at types of diets. When we look at low-carb, Mediterranean, low-fat diets, all of them will help you lose weight if you follow them very strictly. The red line is the low-fat diet. You can lose 30% of your weight with the low-fat diet. With the Mediterranean diet, you'll actually lose more. And actually the low-carb diets are the ones that actually make you lose the most. The ketogenic diet is number one, do something that's sustainable. Number two is don't get discouraged if you don't lose a whole lot of weight. And number three is pair it with activity. Activity across the spectrum of weights. People that are more active will live longer and feel better than people that aren't as active at that exact same weight. So even if you're overweight and you can't lose the weight, don't be discouraged, keep moving. Keep your body moving, that's really important, I think, take home point. This is a neat study, a very simple study as well, which is all about the timing of what you eat. Okay, so I think a lot of you have probably heard not to eat much after dinner, which is a very wise piece of advice. This was a simple study that took women who were overweight or obese and put them all on a diet. But actually had basically two groups. One group that had a big breakfast, normal lunch, small dinner, and the other group that was flipped. Tiny breakfast, normal lunch, big dinner. And they followed weight loss. The group that had the big dinner lost 8 pounds on a very strict diet. Cut everybody's calories significantly. They lost 8% of their weight. The group that had the big breakfast and small dinner lost 22% of their weight. And so the thought there is that actually, especially with fat, this is where fat ties in again. If you take fat in early in the day, you actually rev up your metabolism, you actually burn more calories, and and actually lose more weight. So the timing of what we eat and when we eat, and I know there's a big craze about fasting and things like that, periods of time without eating anything of 6 to 8 hours are really healthy for you. There is some science to that, I won't talk about that today. But I think the timing of what we eat and how much we eat is really important. So when they've studied diets specifically, one type of diet versus the other, the one that always performs the best for heart health is the Mediterranean diet. So very simply, that's high in fish oils, nuts, olive oils, those type of things are very healthy for you. Again, not to get too sciencey on you, this picture up here on the right actually show an average diet here. If you go below that line, it's better. If you go above the line, it's worse. And any type of Mediterranean diet was actually better in terms of heart attacks, longevity, how long people live, if they followed a Mediterranean diet more strictly than if they just took a normal, typical American diet. So if you can focus on some of those Mediterranean foods, you don't need to clear out your cupboards, but if you find a Mediterranean diet book or find something online, you find some meals like that incorporated into those Mediterranean diet, the meals would be very healthy. This is one of my partner studies, I mentioned earlier. He, like I mentioned, was at Harvard. He had a really neat database that he was exposed to that looked at the impact of diet, what you eat when you're teenagers and 20-year-olds, and how that has an effect on plaque when you're 50-year-olds. And so he published this study in a journal called Circulation, which is a big journal, looking again at risk ratio or odds ratio, with this being the reference range. Anything below that is good, anything above that is bad. And for people, split people basically into 3 groups of how much fruit and vegetables they were teenagers or 20-year-olds. And the more fruits and vegetables you ate, the lower your heart risk got. So drop dramatically. If you're in that second group, you drop to 25%. If you had a lot of, this is 5 servings of fruits and veggies a day, you drop to 40% for your future plaque risk in your heart arteries. So all the teenagers, all the kids out there, mom's right, eat your fruits and veggies, okay?
So Mark, is that kind of what we're talking about? Is what causes heart attacks? Or one thing is the plaque buildup?
Yep, absolutely. So I'll get to that in one of our slides. Absolutely. The more plaque you have, the more risk you have for heart attack, and we'll talk through that. But so in terms of how does diet actually relate to heart disease, certainly diet relates to obesity. Obesity relates to diabetes and high blood pressure. All these things that we know are risk factors for heart disease. But this is one of the few studies that has a direct correlation between what you've eaten and subsequent plaque in your heart, 20, 30 years later. So this is actually a very neat study and really helpful to show that it's never too late, but it's also never too early. So go ahead and start eating healthy as soon as you can. A couple of comments on some supplements. I don't mean to burst anybody's bubble out there, but every time supplements have been studied in a large group of patients, they don't show benefit. So here's a New England Journal article on fish oil. Showed no benefit. You can see the lines of whether you took it or not are exactly the same in terms of outcomes. It's a Journal of American Medical Association JAMA article on multivitamins and men. No difference whether you took it or not. And so don't focus on supplements, focus on the real food. And it's easy to say, maybe harder to do. But every time they've tried to extract whatever's good in the food that we eat and put it in the pill form, it just doesn't seem to work. I don't have a good explanation for you as to why. They did the same thing with red wine. They found out what was really good about red wine for hearts. Pulled out, put it in a pill at 200 times the concentration and showed no benefit. So there's something about actually eating the food, eating the right food the right way, in the right portions, that'll actually keep your heart healthy. So these are all things you should look for when you go to the grocery store next time. And so when we talk about diet, clearly changes in our food environment have made a significant contribution to the obesity epidemic. Just the visual cues of what we eat, larger plates, larger portions, finishing all of it, going back for seconds. And so when you think about your own food environment at home, consider smaller plates. Consider just finishing one time through and not going back for seconds. Share meals if you go to a restaurant that has huge meals. Again, the less processing, the better. And the more healthy food you have around, and the less bulk purchases you make are probably going to be healthier for you. Dietary fat got a bad rap. Dietary fat is, especially now that they've pulled out a lot of the bad type of fats in foods, it's actually quite healthy, especially if you're talking about the healthy fats, the fish oils, fish, those type of things in your diet. They're very heart healthy. So really focus on what we know the science shows us, which is eat more fruits and veggies. Eat more whole grain, seafood, unprocessed meats. It's okay to have red meat if it's unprocessed. And you don't need to take supplements if you're taking a healthy diet. All right, should we move on? All right. So, when and how should you screen for coronary disease? As I alluded to earlier, by the time we've all passed away, every other one of us will have had some issue with coronary disease. And so if you have coronary disease, it's not your fault. You didn't screw up the diet. You didn't listen to the first half of the talk. That's okay. No, I'm just kidding. It's okay. I mean, coronary disease is extremely common. It's in fact 10 times more common than colon cancer, breast cancer, all the other cancers that we screen for. And I won't get too high in my soapbox, but we don't have a systematic way for screening for coronary disease, despite the fact it's 10 times more common than the other types of cancers, which are also, of course, deadly. And so, when should you screen? How should you screen? This was actually a very forward-thinking Time article, I believe it was from 2011, talking about a new scan, which actually wasn't all that new at the time, to screen for plaque in the heart arteries, to say maybe this is a way that we can actually identify those people who are truly at risk and potentially treat them accordingly. So if we go really microscopic and look at actually what happens in the heart vessels, we've had now 60 years of research to say what puts you at risk for heart disease, and even a few protective things. We've heard about these all the time, right? Which is smoking, diabetes, tobacco use, all these things will put you at increased risk. There are actually some protective things. Eating fruits and vegetables, I just mentioned, is protective. Decreasing stress, physical activity, these things can be protective and lower your risk of putting plaque in the arteries. But there's also some things that we can't control. You know, family history we still don't fully understand. You know, family history of high cholesterol is part of it. We don't understand everything about family history at this point. The number one risk factor for heart disease, anybody know? Age. So, how much we can do about that one? We hope we all live long, healthy lives, right? I don't have a pill for that. If I did, you know, we'd be talking on an island as opposed to here in the snow. So there's certain things we can't control. In fact, I did read a CT angiogram on a patient who was 88 recently that had no plaque. I'd never seen it before, so I had to call and say, what are you doing right? But so if we look at, this is a simulation obviously of a heart artery. So normals here, our heart arteries actually have 3 linings to them, and you can actually develop plaque usually in the first few linings. And how that starts, and we hear a lot about inflammation, there's inflammation in the wall. There's something called endothelial dysfunction when we start to get plaque and problems in the wall of our arteries, that they don't relax as well. They take a little bit more physical stress, shear stress, and that leads to more inflammation and eventually formation of calcification and scarring. And actually, we can put a lot of plaque. You'll notice they depicted this really well. It starts in the wall, it actually pushes outward before it pushes in to block the artery. This is a nice depiction of that. I think most patients are surprised when I say that. You'll see that here's your reference wall, and it actually pushes the plaque into the wall of the artery first, and it expands that vessel. We know that the more plaque people put in the walls of the artery, the higher risk they are that plaque's going to rupture and cause a heart attack. And if we look at the prior concepts of, well, let's just do a stress test on everybody, and we'll figure out who's high risk or not. Well, stress test isn't going to be abnormal until here, which is when you have a 70% blockage in that artery. So you can have a normal stress test with a 50% blockage. You can have a normal stress test, of course, with completely pristine arteries. And up until recent scans within the last 10 or 15 years, we haven't been able to tell the difference. If somebody has a normal stress test, are they really high risk or are they not at risk? The way heart attacks happen, interestingly, 70% of heart attacks occur in blockages that are less than 30%. And so the way we've traditionally looked for blockages and how we treat them has probably been incorrect. We should really be looking for these type of changes. Changes to the wall of the artery, plaque, inflammation in the walls of the artery, and then plaques that are at risk for rupturing and starting heart attacks. That's the best way to lower heart attack events as we go forward. So it's a nice depiction. So that leads to, if you were going to pick a screening test for coronary disease, this would be the only one I'd recommend. And in terms of age, it's unlikely you'll have calcified plaque or those early plaque formations before the age of 40. So if you're 25, you'll just be wasting your time and money a little bit. But basically what we're looking for is a very simple concept. This takes 10 or 15 minutes. You'll go in and get a few questions answered. They'll take just literally a snapshot with the CAT scanner. No contrast, nothing else is required for this, and this is for asymptomatic patients. And what you'll see is, you see this little speck of white right here, so this is the ascending aorta. The arteries are actually quite small, but you can see that there's clearly, literally black or white, whether there's calcified plaque in that artery or not. So if there's no plaque, it looks kind of grayish like this, and then if there's calcified plaque, it looks bright white. And that's that change to the wall of the artery that we saw in the prior slide. So it's not causing a blockage, it's not causing a major problem, but it's a sign that there's plaque in the wall of that artery already. As you might imagine, not only can we see it, but we can quantify it. How much is there? Is there a little bit of plaque, a lot of plaque, somewhere in between? And as you might imagine, the more plaque you have, the more risk you have for future heart attacks. So that's the simple basis of this. Is called a heart scan or calcium score. It's a great way to look for plaque burden and subsequently look for heart attack risk. Yep. Yeah, this is absolutely the way to screen, and there's been a lot of debate in our world, in my world, for the past 10 years about what's the best way to screen. This has gotten to the point now, actually, where it's part of the formal guidelines that came out earlier in 2019 to say if you're going to screen or if you have any question about whether somebody should be on a statin medication or not, or whether somebody should be treated aggressively or not, use this as your decision tool. Because correct, yeah, actually this is, we're working with insurance companies to try and prove the value of this, and they'll cover it. Unfortunately, they're not at the point where they cover this, so at least our institution, we make it just the cost of the scan, which is $100. And so, because we believe in the science of it, and we believe in screening so much that we just want to cover the costs, make sure that people get this appropriately. Go ahead. So yeah, it's a great question. So what age do you recommend this? I would say, if I were to choose, I would say for sure by age 50, people should have a screen, because I'll show you in the next slide that we can make a difference if we show a lot of plaque. And if you don't have any plaque, then you don't need to be as aggressive with things like medications. So where I use this the most is in a couple of situations. I'll see a 50-year-old who said, Dad had a heart attack at 51, Grandpa had a heart attack at 51, I turned 51 next week. Help, what do I do? I'll say, get this scan, that'll really help us know exactly your individualized risk. That's one way. The other is the decision on, I've got high cholesterol, borderline cholesterol, I really don't want to take a statin. Should I take a statin or not? Very clear evidence, again, that the more plaque people have, the more risk they have. The reason that we use statins in cardiology, these cholesterol drugs called statins, Lipitor, Crestor, you've probably heard a lot of these referred to. It's less about cholesterol, more about heart attack prevention. We know that people that take these meds have 60% less heart attacks than people that don't. But if you have no plaque, your risk of a heart attack is less than 1% in 5 years. And so I don't need to lower your risk anymore. Lowering 1% risk by 60% doesn't help. But if you have a risk of 10%, 20%, if I can lower that by 60%, I absolutely want to. Cites it a lot for people, strong family history, or borderline cholesterol, or if they just want to know. So you can ask for a heart scan or a calcium score. And I'll maybe give Jerry some pamphlets they have available if people want to do this. We actually scan for these at West Health in Plymouth, down at Abbott, where it's our home base. So there's several places where we can do the scan. Again, it takes only 10 or 15 minutes. So you can self-refer, you can attach my name to it if you like, and I'd be happy to go over any results with anybody if they do get this test. But it's a very helpful thing. It's actually been nicknamed the mammogram of the heart because it is a screening test for asymptomatic people. Very minimal radiation, actually less than most mammograms. Yeah. Yeah, great question. So to repeat the question, he said he had this type of scan done 5 years ago, had a stress test after that, still looked okay. And my guess is that he had some plaque because he had to do the stress test. And so I look at this a couple ways. If you have a completely normal scan, that's the only people that repeat this testing. So this testing is for screening. So if we know you have plaque, hopefully you're on all the right preventative meds to keep you from having a heart attack. And then you don't necessarily need to prove that you're preventing anything because your plaque's not going to go down, unfortunately. Plaque just tends to progress as we age because age is, again, the #1 risk factor for plaque. And so I'd expect your number to be a little bit higher, but I don't think it's going to change how we do anything. But if you have a completely normal scan, so somebody that gets scanned at 50 and they have a normal scan, those people, I think it's reasonable to look at probably actually in 10 years. The formation of plaque is a much slower process than most people think. It's a 5 to 10 year process to even put plaque in the arteries. And so, you don't need to screen this every year by any means. If you have a normal scan, I'd say maybe in 10 years consider it. If you have an abnormal scan, I think you should be honest that you should consider an aspirin, you should be doing all the lifestyle stuff we talked about. Yeah, great question. Yeah?
There's a company out there, it's called Lifeline Screening.
Yep.
Do you know anything about that? Is that a good screening? Or?
Yes, the question about Lifeline screening, there's a group that actually will go to churches and go to community places and actually do a screening. Those are almost all ultrasound-based screening, and so they'll screen the carotid arteries to look for plaque in the carotids because that's a very easily accessible place to look for plaque. They'll look at the valve for aortic size to screen for aortic aneurysms. There's some science to it. Certainly, we look at what's most predictive, and in terms of coronary risk, heart attack risk, this is by far the most predictive. I don't think those are bad. There's no harm to ultrasound screening. So if you see plaque in the carotids, if you see an abdominal aortic aneurysm, those are important things to know about, so I'm not against it. I would say if you specifically want to look at heart attack risk, this would be the way to go. That's a great question. So again, not to be too sciencey, but this kind of rocked the cardiology world last fall when it came out. This was a study called the Scott Heart Trial down in Scotland, and this is my world. So coronary CT angiography, sort of the Cadillac of the calcium scores. If we inject contrast for symptomatic patients, people that have chest pain, active symptoms, we can do a similar concept to what I just showed you, except we actually place an IV and light up the arteries with contrast. We can actually look into the arteries to see if there's a blockage or not. So in a symptomatic patient, you want to see do they have a severe blockage or not. But it also gives us that other piece of information, which is what the calcium score is, to show if they don't have a blockage, do they have a lot of plaque, no plaque, or a little bit of plaque. And so what it's really getting at is more the calcium scoring type of knowledge, which is, okay, none of these patients had a blockage, but let's compare what happened to people that got stress tests versus people that got these CTs to identify the plaque. And so at 5 years, the group that got stress tests had a lot more events than the people that got the CT angiogram. So why? Because we identified the plaque and we treated it accordingly. So these patients had 40% more use of statin drugs, they had 20% more use of other medications that maybe help with a lower heart attack risk. They got coached on diet, they got coached on activity, they got coached on lifestyle. This is the first time in the history of medicine that picking a better test showed an improvement in heart attacks and death. And so that's why it kind of rocked the world of medicine, was that, wow, actually picking the right test can actually make a difference in people's outcomes. If we extrapolate this to what I was just talking about, the calcium score, again, identifying people who are high risk and treating them accordingly, both with the bucket of lifestyle and diet and the bucket of medications that we can use, we can actually lower heart attack rates in 5 years by 40%. And so, pretty striking. And so, that's why I often get on my soapbox about we should be screening everyone systematically like we do for other cancers. So, last slide is just, Carrie asked me to put this in for full disclosure. That's great. That's all great. So which symptoms should I not ignore? What symptoms would be a sign of potential heart attack or problem that I should ignore? Classic symptoms for a heart attack are chest pressure, chest heaviness, the description of there's an elephant standing on my chest, it feels really heavy. Obviously, hopefully don't ignore that. If you feel really severely short of breath suddenly, or if you start to feel more short of breath with things that didn't make you short of breath the week or the month or 6 months before. Meaning if you walk up 2 flights of stairs with your laundry, and that was never a big deal for you before, and all of a sudden, boy, that's really a struggle, I have to stop after that first flight to catch my breath, that may be a sign of a blockage, so those are things not to ignore. Hopefully I don't need to tell you that if you pass out, you should go get checked out. I say that jokingly, but I see it all the time. People that passed out, I passed out after the 5th time and decided to come in. Okay, maybe you're coming after the first one, but okay. So if you pass out, things come get evaluated. The exercise intolerance is more a subtle sign of potential blockages. Again, if you're somebody that hopefully is walking a mile or 2 a day, and all of a sudden you have to stop after a half mile and take a 20-minute break, people are really good at rationalizing this. Oh, it's just beautiful, I wanted to sit and take a break and look around. because you're short of breath, and that's a change, and we need to look into this. And if you get sudden chest or back pain, a ripping, tearing sensation, obviously don't ignore that and come in. So these would be symptoms that would say you should get in sooner than later.
Also, Mark.
Yeah?
Also, sometimes people will go, so like we have a flu and go when we have.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's about 20% of people that don't read the textbooks and come in with very unusual symptoms when they're having a heart attack. And so that could be just feeling profoundly fatigued for no reason, feeling very funny, just a little lightheaded or dizzy. Interestingly, one of the arteries, the right coronary artery, if it has a severe blockage, sometimes can cause even stomach symptoms. It can cause you to feel very nauseated, diarrhea, things like that. If that doesn't go away, or if that's very sudden, and you're not ill otherwise, those would be reasons to maybe get considered and checked out. So this is actually a real picture of somebody's heart in 3 dimensions. So it's pretty cool. We're finally at the point where we can look at arteries, point things out, move the heart around in 3D models. It's really pretty blessed to do what I do. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Mark, just a quick question. A lot of the stuff you've already talked about, obviously, now in the advanced period.
Yeah.
I Apple Watch is pretty young. Is the technology we getting there pretty quickly that you can actually detect something that the user or the patient before you will see something?
Yes, that's a great question. So with all the new wearable stuff, Apple iWatches, all these things, Fitbits, things that people can wear, are we going to be able to identify things even preclinical before people need to come in or know that they need to come in? I would say the short answer is yes. The trick is maybe not so much for coronary disease. Coronary disease is a trickier one because you don't necessarily, with Apple Watch, Fitbit, those things will follow blood pressure, they'll follow heart rate. Certainly people have high blood pressure, certainly people can have a lot of funny rhythms, but there's not necessarily a pattern that we see for coronary disease from rhythms or from blood pressure. So for coronary disease, no. For a lot of other things in cardiology, absolutely. And so, as you might imagine, there's a lot of interest in how do we screen better, how do we screen easier. And so one of my partners has developed patches that basically will give you a 2-lead EKG constantly and hook up your iPhone. And so if there's a change, you can actually see it right away. Certainly things like atrial fibrillation, which is a very common abnormal heart rhythm, absolutely can be discovered with these devices sooner. The trick is, how good is the fidelity of the reading, and what do you do with all that data? You've got people that are, there's just, as a conference earlier this week, they were screening exactly that way. And when we look at these big trials, I was super impressed with the ones that had more than 10,000 people. Well, they did an Apple iWatch study that had 420,000 participants within a month. And so it's more of, again, what's the fidelity of the information you're getting, and what do you do with 420,000 patients? How do you process? Great question. Yeah?
Can you tell us the difference between coconut oil versus olive oil or avocado oil?
Sure. I don't know if I can tell you too much about it other than they're all good for you. Anything that's, olive oil is the one that's most noted in the Mediterranean diet, so there's probably a preference towards that. But avocado has a lot of healthy fats, it'd be part of what would be considered part of the Mediterranean diet or similar to that. So all of those oils are great, and I definitely prefer to use those than other things that you cook with or
I heard once that when you heat olive oil to a certain temperature, it's no longer fat, or something happens to it.
I don't know that one actually.
Okay, sorry.
I think olive oil is a great thing to use, and there's certain things that will change chemically when you change the temperature, but I guess I don't know specifically depending on that. Yeah, so the question is, deli meats, are they processed? Absolutely. Unfortunately. Yeah. Well, I've actually noticed that even the ones that package them and put it in the deli meat form, they've actually used, slices of real meat, like chunks of ham, for example. That's actually probably healthier because they're truly just cutting it and not processing it, as opposed to, when they process these meats, and they end up with much higher cholesterol and other things that we don't want. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, the ones that are ordered from the deli are just fine. Yeah, they would not be processed, most likely. Yeah. Yeah?
One quick question. You said most supplements. And
Yeah. Questions about supplements in general and then coenzyme Q10. Supplements in general, again, for people that are eating a healthy diet aren't necessary. Coenzyme Q10, there are certain benefits to some of these. Some people that have extremely high triglycerides actually do get some benefit from fish oil. It's good at lowering triglycerides. So things like that, there's specific niches for each of these drugs. Coenzyme Q10 is for people that get some degree of muscle ache on statins. It does seem to lower the likelihood of muscle aches. In and of itself, there's probably not a benefit, but in certain instances like that, there's certainly some reason to consider it. Yeah, it's really interesting that our United States population spends more money on supplements than prescription drugs, and they actually spend more money on supplements than their physician pay. Physician pay always gets targeted when we talk about healthcare cost, but actually people spend more money on supplements than anything else. Great questions, great audience. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So you sort of dispelled the fact that you said it's sugar. Is it just sugar contributing to weight gain, or is there something about sugar?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, what is it about sugar? I think fat is healthy, as I hopefully pointed out. Sugar is bad in a couple ways. Obviously, it's going to promote diabetes. People that have high sugar levels consistently in their blood are more likely to be diabetic. It's actually also something that we store. So we store sugar more than we would with fat. We tend to excrete out fat and other things and process those better. With sugar, we just don't process as well. And so as we break it down, we actually store it, so it does turn more into fat in our body than other things that we take in. So it's kind of absolutely. Yeah, and interestingly, they've done studies on kind of how we distribute fat. When they put fat in sort of the spare tire, they jokingly call it, when they put fat around the belly, that's much more metabolically active, and it seems to lead to more plaque formation. And so sugar leads to this, which can lead to more plaque, and so there's multiple effects. All right, thanks everybody.